S07E08.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Hey, Alex. Yeah, good afternoon, mate. Doing pretty well, although not exactly the most positive result on the weekend, sadly, which we predicted. But we get to go again this time on the weekend, and hopefully this run of games coming up, we'll have more positive things to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't a great result on the weekend, although very exciting that we did score a goal. So it was at least something to get a little happy about. It would have been nice if it had come a little bit earlier and it could have really kickstarted a comeback. And I guess, we'll talk about the sort of debatably ruled out offside goal for Tyler Smith as well, which may well have certainly got us back into the contest. But 3-1 loss to Sheffield United. Not a fantastic result at home, but as you said, it was essentially what we'd predicted. A side that had sort of found its scoring boots again in Sheffield United coming up against us. I guess for me, most concerningly was the inability yet again to defend at set pieces. But how did you see the game? What was your big sort of takeaways from it?
Absolutely. The defense was at times non-existent, but there was almost the kind of something that was really obvious to me was the panic that was kind of very clear as you watch City try and defend, particularly from the set pieces. But there was so much grabbing and wrestling and kind of shirt tugging and stuff leading up to every single time the Blades received any kind of set piece or got close to our penalty area. And just the signs of panic is something that we're not really used to kind of seeing in the City ranks. I mean, we haven't always been the best defensive side over the last couple of seasons, particularly with the relegation. But I just don't think I've seen a defensive side of City be as troubled and as concerned as this one. And I guess all you got to do is break down the goals and see Malik Wilks and the role that he's been given in set pieces to just start scratching your head. And
it's such a strange role, though, isn't it?
It's an incredibly strange role, and for someone with the attacking prowess of him, who obviously set League One alight with his goal scoring ability last year and his ability to create goals, to find him with such a pivotal defensive role, and whether that was just for this matchup is glaringly concerning for the City ranks.
And I guess the big concern for me is I think for that second goal that they scored, Wilkes is on Egan. You think, geez, what's happened there? That must be a mix-up. But then he's on him again for the third. I'm pretty sure. And I just can't understand why you wouldn't have your pacey wingers basically on the edge of the box ready for a counter-attack. And you have your Smallwood or your Greaves or someone like that manning. I mean, they only had 3 men in the box. So to have one of their 3 men manned by Wilkes just seemed utterly bizarre to me, let alone to happen twice.
And look, I'm not defending Malik Wilkes. I thought he was awful on Saturday night. I really, and it pains me to say that because he's been such a great player to watch, in recent times. And I just could not help but think, how hard done by he was in the sense that he found himself in that role. And also the serve that he got from his teammates after the defensive lapse, 2 defensive laps, which some may say rightfully so. He's a professional footballer, like he's been given a job and stick to it. But it just for me seemed like a square peg round hole kind of situation, and it was ultimately the undoing of City.
Yeah, and you sort of talked there about the grappling and the roughhousery in the box and everything like that. And it did feel at times like Billy Sharp in particular really sensed sort of a soft underbelly to the City side, I guess partly because of the youth in our ranks, inexperience in our ranks. And he really took that role on of trying to get under our skins, try to unsettle us, especially at set pieces. And it certainly worked getting him the first goal of the game from a pretty pinpoint cross, but perhaps a disappointing effort from Bernard in defending it. And then also in winning a penalty, which probably should have been ruled out for offside, but winning the penalty, which thankfully was then saved by Ingram.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we start to talk about the signings that took place over the season and what we're missing and what we would have added to, I actually wasn't, too upset with what we had defensively, but it's starting to become, more and more alarming that perhaps it's an area that we definitely need to strengthen in. And it just reminds me of the times when we had somebody like an informed Geordie Device. And I separate the two, because when Geordie Device was out of form, he was horrible. But
It's a different
I mean,
player. Yeah.
obviously, changing clubs to QPR has done him the world of good. And it's times like that where you just, are praying for someone like a Geordie Device to be in the ranks and to really, as you mentioned, like grab Billy Sharp and kind of let him know what he's dealing with, type thing. And it just seemed that we were panicked and didn't really have that type of player to make it really clear to the Sheffield United attacking force that they were in our box, and that there was going to be some level of of resolve about us. But it leaves a lot to the imagination, and I really hope it's something we can fix over the next coming weeks in particular. And I dare say Grant McCann would be pulling his hair out and spending a lot of time on that, because he would know as well as any of us that that's just simply not good enough.
Yeah, and I will say, at least when George Honeyman came on, he did seem to go up to Billy Sharp a little bit and got in his face back, which was fantastic to see, and something that we've really missed. But you're right, it feels like, and I was saying it before even last season finished, that we needed to bring in an experienced centre back just to sort of guide and sort of protect those younger players, especially. And you look at the job that Curtis Davies is doing at Derby this season. It's as tangible or hypothetical as you can get, in the sense that he was all but asking us to sign him come the end of last season, and so it was really there to happen. And yes, we went the other direction and went for Tom Huddleston instead. But Curtis Davies was essentially the sort of centre back that we needed to bring in to defend and to sort of guide these younger players that we do have. And you can imagine, if you had Davies in the back line on Saturday coming up against that Sheffield United side, Sharp would not have been getting away with what he did get away with if Davies was there.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I think that you kind of touched on it as well when you mentioned that the choice between do we sign Davies or do we sign Huddleston. I know that also Slater was in the mix for that last spot that I guess was available. But I mean, it's certainly another player that we missed, Huddleston. I mean, we'll talk about it briefly, I imagine, with when we do the 3-2-1s. But it's really hard to find a case for anybody in the midfield either to kind of stand up. Although, as you mentioned, Honeyman was resolute and back to his kind of what you expect from George Honeyman, but there just didn't seem to be, any real poise on the ball either. And Tom Huddleston certainly is someone who we know we can trust when it comes to at least looking to control, some level of midfield lead up play. And that just simply wasn't there on Saturday.
Yeah, a big miss, and a really frustrating one in the sense that from the sounds of things, McCann did everything right with Huddleston. He left him out against Blackburn to manage his time. He had him basically in Cotton Wool for the Sheffield United game on Saturday, and then in a light training session, so not even a vigorous training session, he's pulled his hamstring. I guess sort of silver lining is that they were first expecting it to be quite a lengthy absence from the side, and it's turned out to only be sort of 10 days, 14 days at most, which could mean he's back on the other side of the international break. But just a really frustrating one, where it's not even something where you can say, oh, well, he was overplayed, he's old, he should have been given more rest. He was given the rest, and he was given the time off to sort of prepare him for this game, and it's just one of those unfortunate ones.
Yeah, well, that's it, and that's football. I know that's the cliche. It is exactly what you talk about when you've got an older player, and you do have to manage them. But Tom Huddleston himself has mentioned, that he's not up to speed just yet. And I guess that whether you rest him or not, like it does take time, particularly when you remember how much, football he has missed and how long he's been out for him to be able to return to the full training load and to be playing the minutes that we, do hope we'll be able to come to expect from him. I think it's a slow burn, and it's because of the added factor of we now find ourselves right down the tail end of the ladder. We start to become a little bit antsy, but we do have to remember at times like this how long the season is, and I think Tom Huddleston's role will be a huge one once he does find that match fitness, and is hopefully able to come back and play the minutes that we want of him, and touch wood, be injury free.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess on a more positive aspect of the game, and well, I mean, frustrating in a way that Tyler Smith again didn't start the game. And I mean, we were sort of calling for him to start the game in the podcast last week. It seems a lot of City fans were as well. McCann sort of stuck with Magennis. I'd hope, given Smith's performance over the weekend, that will sort of sell to McCann the need to start him against Stoke this weekend. But when he came on, he looked terrific. Really should have had a goal. He was more onside than Billy Sharp was for the penalty that he received, and yet his goal was ruled out. And then, of course, King Lewis Potter getting a goal for himself. So scoring our first goal since the opening day and getting his second for the season.
Yeah, look, there were some silver linings, and as you mentioned, Tyler Smith is just an absolute live wire. I mean, every time he did get a sniff of the ball, it looked like something was going to happen. I must say the officiating on Saturday was some of the poorest I've seen in a long time, and I know that we can always make those excuses, particularly when we find ourselves and we're kind of clutching at straws for anything to happen. And I do believe that Sheffield United were by far the better side on Saturday night, but that penalty and how offside Billy Sharp certainly looked, and to compare that to the Tyler Smith incident, it was mind-boggling. And I thought there was just some horrible calls in across the whole game. And Billy Sharp did really well to stay on the field, because some of the coming togethers with some of the players he was involved
with Honeyman in particular, he was getting his elbows pretty high up on Honeyman's face.
That gets spotted on another day with officials that don't have the cognitive dissonance that the ones on Saturday night showed. It was a grave concern, and he was very, very lucky, Billy Sharp. But as you mentioned, if Tyler Smith does get that goal and we find ourselves 3-2 with sort of 15 minutes to play, well, anything can happen. But make no mistake, we were in a different class on Saturday night and didn't deserve to even be in the conversation for snatching a late point.
Yeah, although I will say I did feel like in the first 5-10 minutes we did look really sharp, and started the game as well as I think we've started any game this season. So there was that aspect, but it did feel like once we fell behind with that goal from Sharp that there was no way back for us, certainly at that point. And it's been tough recently watching City, where you get that sense that as soon as we concede a goal, we've lost the game. So at least Lewis Potter scoring a goal gives us a little bit of hope back that we can find the back of the net and can get back into games when that happens. But I think overall it was the biggest frustration for me was it was just such an expected result. So there wasn't a whole lot. I didn't even end up feeling particularly disappointed because I expected it so much. And in itself, that was pretty disappointing, ironically.
Yeah, no, I felt exactly the same, and it was really sad to see it pan out, because it did, as you mentioned in the opening 10 minutes, it did kind of get a feel to say, oh well, maybe I've kind of underestimated them here, and they've really rolled their sleeves up and turned up for the occasion. But yeah, it wasn't to be. And I think as you mentioned before, if Ingram hadn't have saved that penalty from Sharp as well, that could have got really ugly really quickly. But
yeah,
they did salvage something that would resemble a contest in the end, but. We were too far off the pace, and particularly after that first goal.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will give my 3-2-1 votes for this game, and I've actually just reshuffled them a little bit from the set that I'd kind of come up with before the podcast. Player that I'd forgotten to include in my votes, which I do think deserves the 3 votes more than anyone else, who you've just mentioned there, is Matty Ingram. I think saving the penalty, his displays yet again, he's got to clearly be leading our player of the season at the moment. He's been sort of the difference in some games between a thrashing and just a disappointing result, I suppose. And in other games, such as on the weekend, saving the penalty kept us in the game at that early stage. As a result of that, I've given the 2 votes to Lewis Potter getting the goal. I think it didn't have a particularly impressive all-round game, but I'm really hoping that goal can sort of reignite a bit of confidence for himself. And just good to see him on the score sheet again. And then the 1 vote for Tyler Smith. I think him coming off the bench looked really lively, looked really exciting. I really hope it's going to be interesting as well. I mean, as you said, Wilkes didn't have the best of games, so there's an argument to be made that both Magennis and Wilkes could come out of the side for the weekend. But I think McGann would find it hard to leave Smith out again, regardless of what he does with those 2.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. I went a little bit different to you, and I think that it's it's a questionable 3-2-1 given the fact that I gave my 3 to Tyler Smith, and not because he was on the field for very long, but just for the sheer fact that every time he was involved, he just looked dangerous, and I felt like with him on the field, we just had a lot more life about us. So he got my 3 points. And he nudged out Ken Lewis Potter, who I guess is probably just influenced purely because of the goal and how crucial it was, more for the record, of not wanting to go too long without scoring, having already broken that record. And then the 1 point for me went to Matt Ingram. I thought that the penalty save was crucial, but at the same time, you concede 3 goals, not really any that his fault, and did save a penalty. But as you said, he's definitely probably been our star man so far, and it probably tells you a lot about how we're playing at the moment. If our keeper, on the back of some of the results we've had, is still still leading that chase.
It's very, it's very worrying considering we've conceded a fair few goals, but he's still probably our best player, which says a bit, I suspect. Well, we'll move on then, and I mean the next section's essentially off-field news, but in this case this week there hasn't been a whole lot regarding City. It's more to do with our rivals, and you sort of touched on before that we're in the bottom 3 on the table, but without even kicking a ball, it might see us outside the bottom 3 because of the points penalties potentially being applied both at Derby and at Reading. News just broke, I think it was last night, about Reading's 9-point penalty, although there's the typical sort of they'll appeal it and they'll try and work with the EFL. So who knows what that will end up looking like. And Derby's potentially sitting at 21 points if they've now gone into administration. Plus they have the 12-point penalty for the FFP breaches. Would essentially see them relegated at this early stage. So pretty significant news, I suppose, in the EFL with those 2 penalties potentially coming across. The Reading one I didn't particularly see coming. I mean, I hadn't paid too much attention to their finances. I'd be a bit sad if I had, I guess, but I didn't think they were in that sort of trouble. And I always sort of think about Reading in the sense that their owners, I believe, are the owners that almost bought us in that Premier League season when the Allams had actually written a farewell message in the programs. That was how close it had come to completion. And then the fit and proper test was failed by those owners. And I think they then went off and bought Reading. So I do get a bit curious to see how they are tracking as sort of a case of, would we have been that much better off with those owners? And it looks like they're in a bit of trouble financially in that sense. So what have you made of those 2 pieces of news?
Look, really interesting. I guess whenever you see a club, suffer a point deduction, I immediately start to feel for the fans because, it's such a frustrating turn of events when, whenever a transfer window comes around, the number one thing that everyone's begging for is signing. So we need a striker, we need this, we need that. And so there is always a tension of club owners trying to bring that in and deliver for the fans, but also walking the tightrope on, being able to comply with all of the FIFA fair play guidelines and whatever else the financial, all the red tape, I guess, that surrounds being eligible to put a club in. So I guess it's almost the integrity that it's done with. So I think sometimes there's a willingness where clubs, kind of do the wrong thing on purpose, hoping to chase success. And then there's the ones that are more kind of accidental, which, we certainly, I believe that loan that we took ourselves sounded more of an accidental type breach. And so, that's kind of what I think about it. As far as what it means for us, it's incredibly helpful given where we find ourselves at the moment. We don't like to say that. Certainly, if we were to stay up on the back of, financial breach point deductions, I think it would probably be a sad state of affairs. And hopefully we can move ourselves in the right direction. But, I guess it definitely changes the picture of what's happening down the tail end of the AFL Championship. And look, it's probably going to help us, regardless of what happens with the Reading situation, knowing that Derby are, as you said, almost certainly going to be in that relegation picture now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who stayed up when Wigan got their points penalty when we went down last time. I can't remember if it might have been Barnsley. And they're certainly ones who, whilst they technically in that case shouldn't have stayed up, at least they then went on and made the playoffs last season. So you can sort of say, well, at least they use that opportunity really well. But yeah, it would certainly be quite a hollow exercise, I would imagine, if we were to stay up at the expense of clubs that are purely below us because of these points deductions. So you'd sort of want to be more than 9 points clear of them, so that you can kind of, happily sort of say that we deserve to stay up. So
And I guess the other factor to consider as well is I know that there's been a lot of outspoken Wycombe Wanderers fans as well who, were the recipients of a relegation, essentially,
yeah,
because Derby were extended the grace of being able to stay on. And, I guess the debate for should Wycombe still be in the championship is another strong one. So you have to look at it from all angles. I think that whenever there's a team that has done the wrong thing or hasn't complied, there are people who suffer and clubs that do suffer as a result. So that's, it's a really unfortunate aspect of modern day football, I think. And, it's just the way that football is now when you consider the cost of running a club and sponsorship, and particularly in COVID times, it's made it even more difficult.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess the other piece of news from sides around us is that Nottingham Forest have sacked Hewden. I think it was 1 win in 22 games or something under him. And typical of a club that sacks their manager, they went out and won the next game as well. So looks like they've started the bounce back to some extent already. And they've appointed Steve Cooper, the former Swansea manager as well, who has a bit of a reputation of doing quite well on a tight budget as well in that sense. So potentially things looking up for Forest as well. I think they're still below us in the table, or they might now be above us with that win. So it does make things much more interesting at the bottom of the table as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, I've seen a lot of people who are already calling for the McCann sacking, which was probably to be expected. And I guess when you think of a manager with the credentials of Chris Hughton, man, I certainly wouldn't be too upset to see him, take the helm at City, despite, as you said, that seemingly fairly poor record with Nottingham Forest in recent times. But he is someone who has been there and done it. And look, yeah.
Forest to me are like Leeds from a few years ago, where I think any manager could go in there and struggle to do a good job. So I sort of take with a pinch of salt his record at Forest in that sense. Although I did hear something about the fact that he didn't want to move homes or something to work there, and that sort of had an impact on the club management or something like that. I don't know, but did a great job at Brighton, did a great job at Newcastle as well, getting them both promoted to the Premier League. So great pedigree, and is now available as a manager. So things would certainly be interesting there if the potential ownership of City changed and they had a bit of ambition and wanted to bring in a manager. That certainly is a manager who's now on the market for a new job. But we'll move on now. You did say last week that you got quite an easy triple flashback quiz question. So this one's a little bit more challenging for you. I'll provide a few hints as needed as we go along. But for yourself and for everyone listening in as well, the question this week is, can you name the last 3 teenagers to score for us? And this is in both league fixtures and in cup fixtures.
Okay, so I suspect that one of them will be Ken Lewis Potter, given the recent times. So I'm going to lock him in, and judging by the notioned head nod, that seems to be somewhat correct. So I'm going to say that I'm 1 from 1 so far, but it could be wrong. Just trying to tell from your response. Outside of that, who else have we had? So teenagers who have played at the club. I think Jared Bowen may have scored as a teenager for City, although he also may have been 20. So that I'm not as sure on that. Maybe Josh Tyman as well. He's another teenage person that could have scored in a City shirt. So if I had to lock 3 in, they're probably the 3 that I would do, but I'm not super confident about Bowen.
That is very incredible deductions or deductive work there, because you do have Lewis Potter as correct. He did score as a teenager against Wigan in the 2021 season. You're also correct in your thinking about Jared Bowen, that he did only score when he was 20. So he did just miss out on scoring as a teenager. I think he'd only maybe just turned 20 that season or something like that. And you were also correct that Josh Tyman did score for us as a teenager. He scored against Swansea in the League Cup in the 16-17 season. And of course, appropriately, he did also score in the League Cup this morning for Stoke against Watford. The third player was actually James Scott, who scored for us against Birmingham in the 1920 season. And I completely forgot that he was actually that young. So he was only 19 when he scored in that game.
That's right.
So,
And so the other thing that I remember, the reason why I selected Josh Timon was because I remember his stocks kind of went up really quick within the City ranks. So there was obviously all this hype around this, teenage prodigy. But I do remember him scoring, and I remember the hype that kind of came with that. And I'm pretty sure there was he was interviewed post match by Burnsy, and it almost it really gave me a feel for just how young he was. And so that was why I kind of thought it was okay to lock him in. But yeah, interesting, really, really fascinating. James Scott, I guess in hindsight now that seems not easy, but you're right. He just seemed like one of those older players, didn't he?
yeah, he seems like he's like 22, 23 perpetually. He's young, but he's not that young.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
fair play.
Well,
It's a good question.
yeah, I mean, like Josh Timon's still only 22. I just had a look at that. So, because he debuted for us in the FA Cup at 16 or something. I think he was like our youngest debutant in a fair while. It might have been ever. And then, yeah, certainly scored that goal in the League Cup. And yeah, look, as I sort of said to you before the episode, these quiz questions generally have sort of a timeliness to them because, of course, we do come up against Josh Timon Stoke this weekend. So we can talk about that game now. Managed by Michael O'Neill, who's been there since 2019. So a reasonably stable club, and also one that's changed its image somewhat since the old sort of long ball or long throw, Peter Crouch up front, sort of Stoke mentality that people might be associating with the Premier League days. But they're quite a possession heavy, attractive team to watch these days. I saw a goal that they'd scored earlier in the season was highlighted by I think it was the Second Tier podcast put out a tweet with it, and it was sort of a tiki-taka sort of goal that they scored. So a really impressive side these days, and also very much a very familiar side when you look at some of the names in their lineup when they've got Klukas, Timon, Powell, Chester. I think Ince is there as well. So there's quite a few ex-City boys running around for them, and three of them did score this morning against Watford. So a very interesting fixture ahead of us. I think I saw so they've got 2 wins in their last 5. They did lose to Derby in those 5 games. And they've got 3 wins in their last 5 against us as well. The most recent game against them was that 5-1 defeat, which was our last game before the COVID lockdown in that 2021 season. So it's gonna be an interesting game. They're not in red hot form, but they are a side that's looking to push on for that top 6, top 2 sort of place if they can. So it'll be a tough game, but I don't see it as tough a game as some of our recent games, I would say. But what do you think?
I think, as you mentioned, there's some serious pedigree there, but yeah, I guess they probably don't have the same fear factor that, as you mentioned, with perhaps that of Sheffield United do. It's going to be such a tough one for us here, only because I just can't see how we can fix our defense so quickly, and I think that's going to be the key. We talked about it previously that the biggest thing for City at the moment is not really playing any of that football on the front foot. There's not really a high concentration of chances, and because of that, I think we've struggled to really get our attack sorted. And every single time, Ken Lewis Potter, to a lesser extent, or particularly Malik Wilkes, when they get on the ball, they just don't seem to have that same level of impetus. And I think it's largely because they are being given, such more defensively heavy roles. So I know there would have been a lot of work done on the training ground, but if Stoke, as you say, seem to have changed their brand of football a little bit, we're going to have to work very, very hard to try and recapture some of that, defensive resolve that, is needed for us to be able to cause threats up the other end.
Yeah, definitely. We sort of talked before about the potential for Smith to come into the side. I guess as well, Honeyman is one who can probably start this game after coming on at halftime last weekend, or coming on in the second half last weekend. How do you see the lineup for this one? Who would you sort of make changes with?
Look, I just can't for the life of me work out how you could probably start Magennis or Wilkes at the moment. I think certainly Wilkes, given the fact that he looked far off the pace on Saturday night, and the fact that they've just been using him in a way that leaves a lot to the imagination, as we mentioned at the start. So if Wilkes was to start, I would genuinely be amazed at that. And I just can't see how you can continue to leave Tyler Smith out of the side from a starting standpoint. I would absolutely start Honeyman. I thought he was the spark, and kind of, as you mentioned, not even as much in what he does with the ball, but just his presence on the field. The fact that he is just a pest and can terrorize, teams, and really unsettle and break up their attack. He seems to do more running than the rest of the squad put together. It's just how he looks when he's on the field. So starting Honeyman, I think you're right, is probably a must. Tyler Smith is, if he doesn't get a start this week, I'd be banging down the manager's door, finding out what it takes to to find himself in the starting 11. But if Malik Wilkes starts, it would be a sheer miracle.
Yeah, probably a discussion for another day, but I sort of look at, we're talking there about Honeyman coming on and the presence he had, and I look at Louis Coyle, who's probably been again an underrated option for us on the right side of defence, and look at Smallwood as captain, and just think, how is Smallwood continuing to hold the captaincy over either of those two players, who seem to just hold themselves so much more confidently and with so much more assurance on the field. And I sort of I wonder, I would think essentially that Honeyman would come into the side for Smallwood on the weekend, and then potentially I would probably push Moncur up to that Wilkes position, Smith on for Magennis, and then Honeyman in for Smallwood, and then maybe start Cannon. I mean, we haven't seen a whole lot of Cannon so far. Maybe start. Well, I guess if Huddleston's injured, it's really just Cannon, Smith, and Honeyman as that central three.
Look, there's a lot of options for Grant McCann to actually really change things up, and I think that if Sheffield United result told us anything, it's that we weren't asking enough questions, and that's largely what the problem is. If you've got Malik Wilkes with a significant defensive role, that tells me that you really need to go back and look at what you've got in your arsenal and try and shake things up a little bit. I think that if Malik Wilkes and Josh Magennis were having their moments and looked a threat at the other end, it would be really hard to make a case for unsettling your strikers if you're losing these games 3-1 or struggling to score. But the fact that they haven't really had too many big moments and don't seem to be causing too much of a problem when they do get the ball, it tells me that McCann needs to go back and look at how he sets up the team defensively and in the midfield and try and control the ball a little bit more than what we currently are. And if that's not to happen, I just don't see a way past Stoke.
Yeah, definitely. Do you give us much hope of a result, whether that's a draw or a win, or do you think this is going to go the same way as that Sheffield United game?
I think it depends largely on who Grant McCann starts. I think if he does shake it up, then I'd be really confident about having some kind of impetus or a different feeling in the camp. I think if he keeps going with the similar kind of starting 11, I just don't know if that team, with where we sit on confidence, is going to be able to trouble a team that has the pedigree that Stoke do have. Look, I do give us a chance, absolutely, but I think this is absolutely the game week where McCann needs to try and shake things up. I mean, the biggest criticism that you will hear from City fans is McCann hasn't really proven himself in the Championship, which is, at this stage, a fair statement. So let's see what he can do. Let's not kind of die wondering and sit back and rest on your laurels and see what the squad and all these new signings can do.
Yeah, I definitely think there's an element of playing favourites or playing it safe, even though it's not really playing it safe, by sticking with the players from last season in Magennis and Wilkes, when you've got options like Smith who can come on and turn the game like he did. So look, it'll certainly be interesting. I'm quite in agreement with you. I think if we do make those changes, that I'd certainly give us a chance of at least snatching a draw in this one. I think you can point to that derby result last weekend against them, that they're not unbeatable. They're there to be taken if we go at them and try to score goals, create those chances. And we'll see what happens. I think, as you say, a lot will be known once we see the team lineup for this game. So that'll certainly be interesting. We do also have a game next week against Blackpool, who we are familiar with from last season, managed by Neil Critchley. We haven't actually beaten them since 2004, so we had a draw with them and lost to them last season as well. So we'd be quite eager to turn that around this season and get a result. And I guess if there's any sort of side that you could kind of look to regain a bit of confidence against, it's got to be a side that's also come from League One with you, where maybe McCann will be a bit nervous because there's not as many excuses with this sort of fixture. You can't really say that we're playing a championship side when it's a side that came up alongside you into the division. And a bit like Stoke, there are a few ex-City players for them. I think Josh Bowler's in the lineup for them. Scored the winner against Fulham a couple of weeks ago for them as well. So that'll be an interesting reunion. But um, it's the only thing I can say is it's a tricky game only in the sense that there's that increased expectation that we get a win. But it's sort of like that derby game where you kind of go into it expecting the win, and that can sometimes play with that players' heads a little bit. But it's certainly a game that we've got to be getting a result from.
Have to be, but as you said, our record against them isn't great, and you already touched on them beating Fulham. You know, who are certainly my favourites to go up. You know, and probably win this league. I'd be really impressed if there was a team that, you know, that is able to beat Fulham, or I guess you can also look to the likes of West Brom. But anyone in those top three, like Fulham, are, you know, clear candidates for the title. And I just think, if, you know, even though Blackpool are, as you mentioned, a League One team that's come up, they've proven that they do have a little bit about them. And yeah, it's definitely, if we are going to stay in this league, we do need to be beating the teams, and certainly our, you know, our promotion neighbours as well. So it's going to be an increased pressure, certainly for McCann. Not just because it's Blackpool and, as you said, we need to win, but because we need to win full stop, given the, you know, we haven't experienced that since the opening day, and things have looked pretty grim. So, you know, if we win that game against Stoke, it will certainly give us a very good, you know, motivation step and confidence to go out and really, you know, throw everything at Blackpool. But I think if we're to lose that game against Stoke on the weekend, this Blackpool game becomes a very tough fixture.
Mm. That's my worry. Is a loss to Stoke then puts so much pressure on this game, it becomes unlosable in a way, because to be going essentially 2 months with one win in the division is suddenly becoming really quite concerning. So, and you know, supporters have long memories. They remember last time we were in the Championship in a similar sort of run of form that saw us relegated. So we need to be, look, even if it's 4 points, you know, a draw from Stoke and a win against Blackpool, something like that, just to sort of stop the rot and turn the momentum around. Look, I can't see any way of spinning this result against Blackpool if it's not a win. I think even a draw is disappointing. Look, if it's a 2-2 draw or something like that, where we're at least sort of starting to get our scoring momentum back, at least that's a positive element. But I really think we need 3 points out of this game.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it is such an important week in the life of this City season. I think that, you know, two losses really changes the conversation, and I think that the pressure that would be on McCann after that to keep his job before Christmas would be significant.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you for joining me, Logan.
My pleasure, Alex. Always good to be here.
No worries, and thank you everyone for listening in. As always, hopefully we'll be joining you next week with 2 wins in the bank for City and some positive results on the board. But until next time, come on, City.